worst cruelties are not the ones that shout. They are the ones that whisper day after day until a person forgets what their own name sounds like in a kind mouth. The rain had been falling since mid-morning, and by the time Maren Ashworth reached the edge of Cavendish Square, her boots had soaked through entirely. She could feel the cold water between her toes with each step, that particular intimate misery of wet wool pressed against skin, and she kept walking, because stopping was not something she had the luxury of doing. The ledger was tucked under her right arm, wrapped inside an oilcloth she had begged from the kitchen boy before she left, and she held it against her ribs with a grip that had nothing to do with warmth, and everything to do with the 47 pounds, 6 shillings and 9 pence she had spent the last 3 weeks documenting. Lady Forsyth had given her until the final bell of the evening to return the quarterly accounts to their correct final sum, or the position would be terminated. Lady Forsyth had been very precise about that. Maren had been precise too. She had been precise about every entry in that ledger. She had been precise about the missing coal delivery in October, precise about the wine merchant's receipts that did not match the cellar inventory, precise about the 6 separate disbursements to a solicitor's firm in Holborn that appeared nowhere in the approved household expenditure, and precise enough to understand that if she pointed any of this out directly, she would be dismissed before nightfall regardless. She had been Lady Forsyth's household accountant for 11 months. Before that, she had been the daughter of a solicitor in Bath who had loved her extremely and died of a chest infection 2 winters ago, leaving behind a house already mortgaged, a modest collection of law books, and a debt of £120 to a moneylender who had shown up at the front door 4 days after the funeral with his hat in his hand and a perfectly pleasant expression on his face. Grief, Maren had discovered, was a season she had not been permitted to enter. Survival had arrived first, demanding all available attention. The rain intensified. She turned her face down and kept walking. The errand was simple. She was to deliver the corrected accounts to Mr. Crail, Lady Forsyth's solicitor, at his private office on Grosvenor Street, because Lady Forsyth had announced at 3:30 that the ledger could not remain another night under the same roof as a housemaid who had, apparently, been stealing silver spoons. There were no missing spoons. Maren had inventoried them that same morning. But Lady Forsyth's announcements were not invitations to debate, and the solicitor's office was only 20 minutes' walk, and so Maren had taken the ledger and gone. 20 minutes had become 40 because she had taken the wrong turning off Duke Street, and then the rain had become serious, and then the street lamp at the corner of what she believed was Aldersgate Lane had given out entirely, and now she was standing in an unfamiliar part of the city in the dark with wet feet and a ledger she could not afford to drop, staring at a street she did not recognize. She was not frightened. She noted this in herself with a mild interest that probably should have concerned her. The fact that standing alone in the rain in an unknown street at 8:30 in the evening produced in her no fear whatsoever, only a flat, cataloging fatigue. She was 23 years old and she had been exhausted for approximately 2 years. There was a house directly to her left, large, set back from the street by a short courtyard with iron railings, the gate slightly ajar. Every window dark except for one on the ground floor, where a warm amber light pressed against the glass from inside. A fire, or a lamp. She stood looking at it for a moment, calculating the oilcloth's ability to keep protecting the ledger against rain that was now coming sideways. She pushed the gate open and walked up to the door and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. The rain found the back of her neck. The door opened. He was tall. That was the first thing, the sheer vertical fact of him filling the frame, broad in the shoulders, wearing no cravat, his dark coat unbuttoned at the throat, his fair hair slightly disordered, as though he had been sitting by that fire for some time and had run his hand through it once or twice without thinking. He was holding a book with one finger marking his place, and he was looking at her with pale gray eyes that were not alarmed, not annoyed, not performatively unwelcoming in the way of a man whose butler had the night off. He was simply looking at her. She said, "I am terribly sorry. I have lost my way. I am trying to find Grosvenor Street, and I believe I have walked in entirely the wrong direction." He looked at her for one beat longer. Then he said, "You have. Come in. I will not impose. You are soaking." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." She came in. The entry hall was large and dark and very warm. The floor was stone. There was a coat stand to the left and a pair of riding boots set neatly beside it, and beyond that a doorway through which she could see the source of the amber light, a fireplace with a decent fire burning, 2 leather chairs angled toward it, a side table with a glass of something she strongly suspected was brandy. The house smelled of wood smoke and old paper and something underneath that she could not name, clean linen perhaps, or cold stone that had been warm for centuries. She stood in the hall and water dripped from her hem onto his floor. He had disappeared through a door to the right without explaining himself. She heard water running. A kettle, she thought, placed on a range. She stood and did not touch anything. He reappeared. "Give me your cloak." She unclipped it and handed it over, and he hung it on the coat stand with the efficiency of someone accustomed to performing this task for themselves. The coat beneath was presentable. She had made certain of that before she left Lady Forsyth's this evening, as she made certain of it every morning, because dignity was the one currency she could manufacture without income. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the room with the fire. "Tea will be 4 minutes." She sat. The leather chair was deeper than she had anticipated, and the fire was warmer than she had anticipated, and she gripped the ledger in her lap with both hands, because setting it down felt like the first step toward becoming an inconvenience. He sat in the opposite chair, opened his book again, and appeared to read. She looked at the fire. She looked at the room. The walls were covered with bookshelves, floor to ceiling, interrupted only by the fireplace and a single dark landscape painting above it. A moor scene, gray sky, low heather. The furniture was old and excellent. There were no ornamental clocks. There were no portraits with little brass plaques engraved with names. There was nothing on any visible surface that told her whose house this was. She said, "I am Marin Ashworth." He turned a page. "Leander," he said, as though that were the end of it. She studied him from across the hearth. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a year or 2 either side. The firelight made a shadow of his jaw, which was strong and unhelpfully geometric. His hands on the book were large, and there was an old scar running across the left one, pale against his fair skin, from the base of the thumb to somewhere underneath his cuff. He had not told her his surname. She found this peculiar, but not threatening. "You make your own tea," she said. "Tonight I do." She considered this. "Where is your household?" "I gave them the evening." He did not look up from the book. A performance of some kind was being held. It seemed unkind to deny them. The kettle made itself known. He set the book down, spine carefully up, and went to make the tea with the unhurried competence of someone who had done it before, and found it neither beneath nor above him. When he returned, he set a cup on the table beside her, and sat back down, and picked up the book again. The tea was very good. She had not eaten since noon. She did not mention this. She said, "I should not stay long. The rain will ease in an hour. It always does here, this time of year, in from the west, and then it breaks." He turned another page. "You are going to a solicitor's office?" "Mr. Crail, on Grosvenor Street." The page turning stopped. It did not resume. She did not know why. She looked at the ledger in her lap. The oilcloth had held. She felt the shape of its edges under her palms and thought, not for the first time, about what exactly was inside it, what the entries meant if you read them correctly, what they revealed about Lady Forsyth's household and, more particularly, about the solicitor's firm in Holborn and the 6 payments. She thought about what it had cost her to document all of it this neatly. She thought about the fact that there were only 3 people in London who could read those entries and understand their full implication. Herself, whoever had authorized the payments, and the solicitor who had received them. She had been walking to the solicitor's office, in the dark, alone, with a ledger that constituted a complete legal record of his malfeasance. She sat very still. Leander lowered his book. He was watching her now, not reading. Watching the particular quality of stillness that had come over her face, which he recognized, because it was not the stillness of calm. It was the stillness of a person doing rapid, precise arithmetic in conditions of limited information. He said, "Tell me what the ledger contains." She looked up at him. "You have been holding it since you arrived," he said, the way someone holds the only document that stands between them and a bad outcome. "I am noting it." She said, carefully, "I am delivering it for my employer." You said you are Marin Ashworth. Are you a relation to Thomas Ashworth of Bath, the solicitor? The chair felt very still beneath her. He was my father. He did not say he was sorry. She had, by now, catalogued exactly how much she disliked being told that. He only looked at her for a moment, with those gray eyes in which the firelight was doing small, uncomplicated things, and then he said, "Your father had an excellent reputation. I consulted him once. About a land boundary matter. He was thorough and honest, and charged me a perfectly fair rate, which I admired." Her throat was suddenly tight. She did not let it show. He was all of those things. When did you lose him? 22 months ago. He absorbed this with a small nod. Not performing sympathy, simply receiving information, which she found more bearable than she had expected. She looked back at the fire. She thought about what he had said when she told him the solicitor's name, the page-turning that had stopped and not resumed. The quality of the pause. She said, "Do you know Mr. Crail?" He did not answer immediately. "I know of him," he said finally, as would anyone who pays attention to which firms of solicitors in this city have recently undergone a change of managing partner, and why. She waited. He set the book down on the table, not spine up this time. He clasped his hands in his lap, the scarred left hand resting over the right, and he said, "Crailey's firm has been under investigation for 4 months. By the Office of the Registrar, on a matter involving the mismanagement of estate funds, 3 separate clients. The investigation is not yet public, but it will be, within the fortnight." The fire crackled. Rain struck the window, hard, then subsided. She looked down at the ledger, the oilcloth, her own hands. She said, 6 payments, to a firm in Holborn, Lady Forsyth's household accounts. They do not appear in any approved expenditure. The amounts range from £9 to 63. I have the receipts. I copied them before I left the house, because I suspected I might require them. She paused. I did not know why I suspected it. Precisely. I know now. He was very still, not the stillness of shock, the stillness of someone who has received a crucial piece of information and is integrating it efficiently. He said, "Lady Forsyth is not the author of this. No. She is many things I could enumerate, but not a thief. She did not authorize those payments. They were authorized using her seal, by someone with access to her study. Crail has access to her study. He manages her late husband's estate. He visits on the first Tuesday of every month." Marin looked up. "I documented 12 such visits in the past year. 6 of them are the same 6 months in which the payments appear." The room was very quiet. He said, "You walked out of that house tonight, alone, in the rain, carrying a complete legal record of a crime to the man who committed it. I did not know that when I left. You know it now." "Yes." He unclenched his hands, very deliberately, and placed them flat on his knees. He said, "I will tell you something about this house. Will you allow me to?" She nodded. He said, "My full name is Leander Ashby. I am the Duke of Carwick. You are sitting in Carwick House, on Aldersgate Lane. I answered my own door tonight because my household had the evening, as I told you." He said this without weight, without performance, as though the dukedom were a fact of geography, like the position of the moor in the painting above the fire. "I have a solicitor, not Crail, a man named Voss, who is reliable and who will be at his home address at this hour, and will come if I send for him. The documents you carry should be in his custody before midnight." She looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. She said, "Why?" "Because," he said, "your father was thorough and honest, and it appears you have inherited both qualities at considerable personal cost, and because those qualities deserve an advocate who is not simultaneously the person those qualities are threatening." She did not cry. She had not cried, she realized, since the moneylender had come to the door in Bath, with his hat in his hand and his perfectly pleasant expression. She had not cried, because crying was a thing she had quietly set aside, the way you set aside a coat you cannot afford to have cleaned, meaning to return to it later, when there was room. There had not been room. She said, "If I give these documents to your solicitor, Lady Forsyth will dismiss me in the morning regardless." "Yes," he said, "almost certainly. I have £18 saved. I can manage perhaps 3 months. Yes. I am telling you this, she said, so that you understand, I am not making this decision from a position of security. I am making it from a position of knowing exactly what it costs and choosing it anyway. He looked at her steadily. I know, he said. That is rather the point. He sent a footman to Voss's house with a note. Maren sat by the fire for the hour the rain took to break, and she drank her tea, and Leander read his book, or appeared to, and neither of them felt the need to perform anything for the other, which was its own kind of relief she did not examine too carefully. Voss arrived at 9:15, a compact, precise man of 50 in a good coat, who looked at the ledger Maren presented to him with the focused attention of someone reading a legal document rather than being polite about it. He asked her 4 questions. She answered them. He made 3 notes in a leather-bound notebook he produced from an inner pocket, and then he looked at Leander and said, "This is adequate, more than adequate." He looked at Maren. "Miss Ashworth, you understand that as the person who documented this, you will likely be asked to give a statement." "I understand." "And you are willing." "I am willing." Voss made another note. He left at 9:20. Maren looked at the fire. "You should not walk back alone," Leander said. "I had planned to find a hackney. My coachman will take you." He stood, and she noticed again the height of him, the physical fact of it, the breadth of shoulders under the unbuttoned coat. He was not, she decided, accustomed to people being afraid of him, because he moved without that quality of careful diminishment that very large, powerful men sometimes performed. He simply occupied the space he occupied. Will you allow that? She thought about it for precisely 3 seconds. Yes, thank you. He walked her to the door and retrieved her cloak from the stand, which had dried reasonably in the warmth of the entry hall. He held it while she fastened it, not as a gesture of hierarchy, but as a simple practical service, the way he had hung it, and the way he had made the tea, as though utility was its own sufficient reason. She said, at the door, "You did not know I would knock." "No, you simply answered." "I always answer my own door," he said, "when there is no one else to do it." It seemed absurd not to. She looked at him in the doorway, rain smell in the air, the cold stone of the front step under her boots, the lamplight from the entry hall, making the angles of his face very clear. There was something behind the gray eyes that she could not read yet, which was not a problem precisely, only a fact she registered and set aside. She said, "Good night, then." "Good night, Miss Ashworth." She got into the carriage. She rode back through wet streets that smelled of rain and chimney smoke and horse, and she thought about the ledger that was no longer in her hands, and the fact that this produced in her not lightness but a very specific quality of clarity, as though a noise she had been ignoring for months had finally stopped. She did not sleep well. She rarely did. In the morning, Lady Forsyth dismissed her. The reasons given were 3, and none of them were true, and Maren received them standing in the sitting room with her hands at her sides and her face arranged into a polite and entirely uninformative expression. She said, "Of course, I will collect my things." She did not say anything else. She did not beg or weep. She had known this was coming from the moment she had sat in Leander Ashby's leather chair and understood who Mr. Crail was, and knowing a thing in advance had always made it more bearable. What she had not anticipated was the letter that arrived at her lodgings 4 days later. It was from Voss's firm. It was formal and brief. The office of the registrar had received the documentation and opened a formal inquiry. Mr. Crail's firm had been suspended from practice pending the outcome. Lady Forsyth had been notified and had expressed, through her own new counsel, considerable interest in the identity of the person who had compiled the evidence. Voss had advised against disclosure of her specific address for the present moment. There was a second letter, from a different hand, enclosed inside the first, unaddressed, unheaded, no formal salutation. It said, "Voss tells me the inquiry is progressing. I hope the 3 months are holding. If they are not, I would be grateful to know. L.A." She read it twice. She set it on the table beside her bed, and she looked at it for some time. He had not offered anything. He had asked to know. That was a very particular kind of restraint, and she recognized it, because she practiced it herself. She wrote back. She told him the 3 months were holding, for the present. She told him she had found 2 potential positions, one as an accountant for a linen merchant on Threadneedle Street, who seemed neither cruel nor dishonest, and one as a tutor in French and mathematics to a rector's children in Islington. She told him she was considering both with the same methodology she applied to ledgers, listing assets and liabilities in 2 columns, until one side became obviously heavier. She did not tell him that she had thought about the fireplace and the tea, and the gray eyes approximately once a day since she left, because that was a ledger she was not ready to open. He wrote back in 3 days. He said the linen merchant had a solid reputation as a tradesman and an uncertain one as an employer. The rector in Islington he did not know, but he knew someone who did and could make inquiry if she wished. He said this without making it an offer she was obligated to accept. He said it the way he did most things, it seemed, as though every action were available to her, and the only question was which she preferred. She wrote, "Make the enquiry." He did. The rector was decent. The children were aged 6 and 9, and reportedly more interested in mathematics than French, which she found encouraging. She took the position. 17 days passed, then 24. She taught arithmetic to a girl named Clara, who had an exceptional eye for pattern, and a boy named Edmund who preferred to argue about whether mathematics was discovered or invented, which Marin found she did not entirely mind. She walked to Islington each morning from her lodgings, which were 4 streets away, and she kept a small, careful record of her expenses, and watched the £18 diminish at a rate she found manageable, and noted the precise day, 51 days after leaving Lady Forsyth's, on which she was no longer afraid. She received 2 more letters from the L.A. Hand. One reported that the registrar's inquiry had concluded its first phase and issued a preliminary finding against Crail, and that Lady Forsyth had been formally restored to control of her own estate accounts, which was the correct outcome and would presumably produce some belated gratitude in that quarter. The second was shorter. It said only, "I find I would like to see you again. The fire is still there, if that matters." She read this letter standing at the window of her room in Islington in the early evening, with the sound of Clara practicing a scale badly on a pianoforte somewhere in the house below, and she felt something that had been very tightly closed begin, with caution and without fanfare, to open. She wrote, "Then I will come to tea on Thursday." On Thursday she knocked at the gate of Carwick House on Aldersgate Lane, and this time it was answered by a footman in proper livery who showed her through to the same room with the bookshelves and the Moore painting, where the fire was burning and the leather chairs were angled toward it as before, and Leander was standing at the window rather than sitting, which suggested he had heard the gate and had not quite managed to sit back down in time. He turned when she came in. The gray eyes were the same. The jaw was the same. He was wearing a cravat this time, tied with evident practicality rather than fashion, and he said, "You came." She said, "I said I would." The tea came on a tray, delivered by a footman this time rather than assembled by his own hands, and they sat across the fire from each other, and she told him about Clara's aptitude for pattern finding and Edmund's philosophical arguments, and he told her, with a dry brevity that she found she enjoyed, about the state of the estate in Northumberland, which apparently required a new drainage scheme on the western fields, and a new factor because the old one had retired, and which he had been managing from London for 3 months through a series of increasingly inadequate correspondence. She said, "When did you last go north?" 4 months ago. "Is that long, for you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is where I think most clearly. London is necessary. Northumberland is." He stopped. "I am not certain I have the word for it." "Home," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, exactly that." They sat in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The fire said what it always says, which is only warmth and movement, and the smell of burning wood. She came to tea twice more in the following fortnight, and then on the third occasion he asked if she would walk in the park, which she understood to be a change of terrain with implications, and she said yes, because she had kept her 2-column ledger, and the asset side had grown considerably heavier. He called on the rector's household formally, with proper card, and announced hour, as protocol required, and the rector's wife was agreeably surprised, and the children were briefly impossible to manage, and Leander looked at Edmund, arguing about epistemology over the tea cake, with an expression Marin could only describe as recognition. On the walk back from the park on a Tuesday in late April, when the trees were doing what trees do in late April in London, that particular excessive and hopeful green of new leaves, He stopped on the path under a horse chestnut and said, without preamble, "I would like to ask you something." She stopped beside him. He said, "I would like you to come north, to Carwick." He paused. "I recognize that requires context." She waited. "I want you to see it," he said. "Not as a proposal, not yet, as information. I would like you to have the complete picture before I ask the actual question, because you are a person who makes decisions based on evidence rather than atmosphere, and I respect that sufficiently to try to accommodate it." He looked at her steadily. "So that is the proposal of the proposal. Come north, see Carwick, then decide." She stood under the horse chestnut with the green light coming through it and looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. He never looked away, she had noticed. It was one of the things she had entered on the asset side of the ledger. A man who looked at you as though looking was worth doing. She said, "What is the drainage situation on the western fields exactly?" Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was clearly its close relation. "I will show you the maps," he said. She came north in May. Carwick was 4 hours from London by the fast road, a house of pale stone set into a hillside above a river, wide and low and sure of itself in the way that very old buildings sometimes are, as though they have seen enough weather to stop worrying about it. The moors began where the grounds ended, that same gray-purple expanse she had seen in the painting above the fire, and in the actual presence of them, she understood why a man might need them to think. She spent the first day seeing the house. A housekeeper named Mrs. Porritt showed her through it with a professional thoroughness Maren recognized and respected, and she asked sensible questions about the running of it, and looked at the estate ledgers, which Leander provided without making her ask twice, and which she found to be in reasonable order, but with several opportunities she noted privately and intended to raise when the time was correct. On the second day she walked the western fields with him and looked at the drainage problem, which was exactly as described, a question of gradient and blocked secondary channels, and she told him her observations, and he listened to them the way he listened to everything, with complete attention and without the particular quality of patient tolerance that some men used when receiving information from women, the quality that meant they were waiting for you to finish so they could say what they thought. He simply listened, and then he said, "The factor I have in mind is very good on the technical side, but tends toward optimism in his timelines. You would have to account for that." She said, "I always account for optimism in timelines." He looked at her then, the gray eyes in the outdoor light, which was a softer gray than London light, less certain of itself, and he said, "I know you do." They were standing at the edge of the field with the river below them and the moors beginning beyond that, and she understood, with the precision of someone who has kept meticulous accounts, exactly what was being offered and exactly what she was willing to offer in return. She said, "I have conditions." He said, "Yes. The estate accounts will be managed jointly, not by me alone, not by you alone, but together, with full visibility in both directions. I will not be a decoration, and I will not be a ward." "No," he said, "I had not planned that. I will continue to have my own correspondence, my own work for the present. I have obligations to Clara and Edmund for at least the spring term. Of course, and the drainage scheme will be approached with a realistic timeline and a contingency column," he said very seriously. "I would not have it any other way." She looked at the river. She thought about a house in Bath with law books in it, and a man who had loved her extremely and died too soon, and a moneylender on the doorstep, and 22 months of holding herself together with the same methodical care she applied to ledgers. In the same way you keep adding columns accurately, so that eventually the total becomes something you can work with. She thought about a fire on a rainy night and a door that opened. She looked back at him. She said, "Then yes." He did not sweep her into his arms. He was not that kind of man, and she was not that kind of woman, and between two people of their respective temperaments, the moment of decision announces itself differently. He simply took her hand, the left one, his own scarred hand closing over her fingers with a steadiness that was also warmth, and he held it, and she let him, and the river went about its business below them. Later, when they had walked back up to the house and Mrs. Porritt had produced an early supper, and Leander had spread the estate maps across the dining table to show her the Western Field drainage scheme in its full cartographic reality, she noticed a thing she had not noticed before. In the corner of each map, in a handwriting that was clearly his own, there was a date and a notation in small, careful letters. Every decision documented, every change recorded, every alteration justified in a margin note. She looked up at him across the table and the maps. He said, "Nothing. Only watched her register it." She said, "You keep records." "I find it reassuring," he said, "to know that the sum of things adds up correctly, that the entries account for each other." She looked at the maps for a long time. All that careful record-keeping, all that patient, precise attention to the running total. She said, "It does add up, doesn't it?" He looked at her across the candlelight and the old maps, and the evidence of a life tended with unusual care, and he said, "Yes, I believe it does." There is a kind of accounting that has nothing to do with money. You know it if you have ever sat with your losses and tallied them honestly, and found, at the bottom of the column, something you did not expect, not a deficit, not even a balance, something that looks, improbably, like a beginning. That is what Marin Ashworth found. In the end, on a hillside in Northumberland, beside a river, with the moors going gray-purple to the horizon, and a scarred hand steady in hers. Not rescue, not charity. A partnership entered with open eyes, and a contingency column, and a full and accurate record of every entry that had led to this particular sum. It balances exactly. The ledger closes.